Three-time WWE Women's Champion, WWE Hall of Fame Class of 2018, one-time Glow Women's Champion. Ladies, gentlemen, my non-binary friends, it is I, Josh Robinson here for Love Wrestling, and this week, it's the Legacy of Ivory. Believe it or not, Ivory actually started wrestling in the 80s. Now, I know a lot of you have probably watched the Netflix series on Glow, and I'm sure most of you are aware, but if you're not, Glow was actually based on a real wrestling promotion, the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. Ivory was a one-time Glow champion in that promotion in the mid to late 80s, which was a part of a tag team called TNA. I know. It was a very over-the-top kind of just a very lighter take on wrestling, especially when it came to women in that time, which it's not like women are what we know today. It was a very different time, but they had their spot. They had their kind of little edge in wrestling that Glow was doing something a little bit different. It was independent, but it's definitely got, it became a very cult-like following, I guess you could say, and Ivory was a part of this. As I mentioned, a one-time Glow Women's Champion, a one-time Glow Tag Team Champion. She was doing things in the 80s, and I think a lot of people who grew up with Ivory are probably like, yeah, she was just around for a short period of time in WWE in the late 90s to kind of mid-2000s. But no, Ivory had been wrestling in the 80s. Now, she only wrestled from the 80s until about 93, 94, when she kind of took a hiatus from professional wrestling, just doing stuff on the independent scene and getting her name out there. She was doing cool stuff and kind of making her name in professional wrestling before the worldwide stage even knew who she was. At the beginning of 1999, Ivory would make her return to wrestling and sign a contract with the WWF, now WWE. Her first appearance in the WWF was accompanying The Godfather. Of course, as you know, The Godfather was a pimp, and she was one of his hoes. A very different time in the Attitude Era, but it was officially announced as Lisa Moretti, would debut as Ivory on February 13th, 1999 on an episode of Raw. She was kind of the love interest of Mark Henry. She was a valet for a long time. Of course, she had her wrestling background, but anything to kind of get your foot in on the door, right? She was trying to get through and trying to make her way into professional wrestling. Now, you got to remember, in 99, women's wrestling wasn't at all what we knew it even in the 80s or even now. It was total sex appeal. It was about women like Sable and Deborah and Sunny and women like that didn't really have any wrestling background. They were there for their sex appeal. Ivory was interesting because Ivory was coming in with a wrestling background and someone who could really grapple, could really get down and wrestle in the ring. I think a lot of part of Ivory's bringing into WWF was less about the sex appeal part and more about the wrestling, because she was able to, even if they were having evening gown matches or, you know, gravy bowl matches or whatever it may be, the 2 or 3 minutes they'd actually get to perform, they had to have someone in there that had some sense of knowledge when it comes to psychology of wrestling. Even in a 3-minute match, they had to get someone that would, you know, make it passable. And Ivory was in there to do that. Ivory was in there to work with the likes of Sable and Deborah and other women, of course, who had wrestling background, like Jacqueline and women like that in that time, and Luna Vachon, and working with different kinds of women, but really just trying to keep the glue, I guess you could say, the glue that held the wrestling match together when she was working with the likes of Ivory and Sable and Tori, women like that who didn't have any wrestling experience, but were bringing in other aspects with what the Attitude Era deemed as important in that time. Now, Ivory in the late 90s to early 2000s would win the WWF Women's Championship on 3 different occasions. She would work with the likes of, like I said, Deborah and Sable and women like that. However, she would also work with the likes of Jacqueline and Chyna and Tori, the Fabulous Moolah. She was working with people that did have wrestling experience. I know I just said the Fabulous Moolah, but listen, in this time, she may have not been in her prime at any point when she was working with Ivory, but they were getting stories, they were getting some attention, and Ivory was kind of the forefront. Now, she was working as a babyface and a heel in this time, but she kind of burst onto the scene pretty fast in the late 90s and won her 3 women's championships in that time, which is kind of cool to say in a time where it was about sex appeal and really women were known in that time for their physical appearance. They weren't known for their wrestling, and Ivory was a wrestler in a model's kind of crowd. In late 1999, Ivory's character began to shift a little bit. She was just less of like a generic role in WWF and more into a kind of conservative role, which was very counter opposite of what all the facts I just said about women being based on sex appeal. She kind of begrudgingly become involved in like bikini contests and evening gown matches and was like, why am I doing this? I'm a wrestler. She was a wrestler in a non-wrestling women's world. That's what was going on in the late 1999 to early 2000s. That's what Ivory's role became. Now, it was shades of what we would know very, very soon, coming up in later that year, maybe her most iconic role of all time in The Right to Censor. She was aligned with The Good Father and Steven Richards and in that group, and became the WWF Women's Champion, and was, not showing a lot of skin and doing the counter opposite of what WWE was kind of presenting, making them the perfect heel. Still some of the greatest theme music of all time. I don't care what anyone says. It is so good. Right to Censor was a great time. In a time where wrestling was as wild as it could be. It was just in a different time in the Attitude Era. A lot of things was happening on television that was just insane. It was just insane stuff, for better or for worse. It was just a crazy, crazy time. And they were the kind of people kind of waving their finger saying, this isn't right, wrestling isn't this. It was a great heel group, and Ivory was kind of at the forefront of that, being the women's champion and entering into a program. Really, China, become one of the most iconic women of that time in WWE, and China was working with a lot of men, and one of her first, if not, I believe, her first program in a full program with a woman was with Ivory, was with the ultimate heel, and trying to make China this absolutely huge babyface. It culminated at WrestleMania 17, where China was able to win the WWE Women's Championship from Ivory. And again, in a time where storylines weren't really a big thing for women, Ivory and China were able to do that, and they had the whole neck issue thing, and they had a whole storyline. And if you go back and watch that, they actually had some pizzazz put into the Women's Championship storyline in a time where the Women's Championship was still getting established again after it was away for so long. And Ivory was at the forefront of all of those that time when the Women's Championship was first kind of reintroduced into the WWE landscape. Now, Ivory would kind of fade into different roles in the after her kind of reign and association with The Right to Censor. She would kind of sporadically appear on TV from 2001, 2002 into her, her time in WWE come to an end in 2005. Now, while she wasn't on TV wrestling all the time, she was, like I said, sporadically featured on Raw. It was about different women at that time: the Trish, the Leaders, the Molly Hollies, the Jazz, Victorias. They all come into play, and Ivory was kind of pushed aside. But while she wasn't on television, she was doing other things. Tough Enough, of course, was introduced to WWE in 2002, and Ivory was one of the trainers on Tough Enough, kind of taking on the role of the female trainer and training a lot of the women in Tough Enough. She would appear on TV as kind of a broadcaster in that time. She would do commentary on Heat. She was doing other things with WWE. Just because she wasn't on TV wrestling doesn't mean she wasn't actively contributing to the company. She was doing so many things. She would go down to OVW and kind of be a trainer and showing the women and the men of the developmental, the next kind of generation of talent, what it was like to be a professional wrestler. Because like I said, Ivory had come from such a long line of experience in the wrestling world that she was able to contribute in different ways that didn't mean having to be on television. In 2005, Ivory's time would come to an end in WWE with some sporadic appearances here and there over the last couple of years in that period. On television and being in Tough Enough and doing the trainer role. She would work on WWE Experience and becoming kind of a voice of WWE in the broadcasting world, whether that be commentary on Heat and really kind of breaking new ground because there wasn't any female commentators in WWE at the time, and she was able to do that for small sections of time throughout her last couple of years with WWE. Now, she would move on to the independent circuits and not really do a lot in the wrestling world. Here and there, she would pop up and be inducted into different Hall of Fames and kind of appear at different indie promotions, but wrestling became a backdoor to what she was doing. She was doing many other things within her life. She was known as a very big proponent of animal rights, and she owns animal shelters and animal grooming and kind of taking animals from bad situations and helping them. She was doing other things outside of the wrestling world that, in the grand scheme of things, mattered to her a lot more than wrestling, I would guess, ever did. On February 12th, 2018, it was announced that Ivory would be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame class of 2018. She would attend the ceremony on April 6th, and she was inducted by Molly Holly. This was kind of her reintroduction into the wrestling world. She hadn't appeared on WWE too much, very here and there on network specials, never in front of the live audience, and never on Raw, SmackDown, or any kind of WWE pay-per-view in the time. This was her first appearance on television in over 13 years. She would make her in-ring return for WWE's first ever all-women's pay-per-view, WWE Evolution, to compete in a battle royal for a future title shot. She lasted longer than all of the other returning female legends, placing 5th after being eliminated by Asuka. Of course, she was in attendance for different WWE events over the time, and on January 29th, 2002, Ivory returned to WWE in her Right to Censor gimmick for the first time in nearly 22 years. Entering the 2022 Women's Royal Rumble at match number 18, she cut a promo on her way to the ring and lasted an overall 25 seconds in the match, but maybe one of the most memorable spots in the 2022 Women's Royal Rumble. At age 60, she became the oldest woman to enter the Women's Royal Rumble and the 3rd oldest overall competitor in Royal Rumble history, behind Jimmy Snuka and Jerry Lawler. And damn, if that doesn't tell you that you can do anything at any age, I don't know what does. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of The Legacy Of. You're enjoying a double episode here with whether you're watching this one or the other one that I dropped at the same time. I won't kind of say what it is because then it makes everything weird and out of order. But you're getting a double episode this week here on Love Wrestling. Make sure to follow Love Wrestling on all socials at Love Wrestling CA. Make sure to follow me across the board at JoshRobinson_000, I should say. And leave a comment and like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. Let me know what you think about Ivory and The Legacy Of. We're in the final season here, guys, and we're ramping and rolling. The final season comes to an end in December here on Love Wrestling. So let's celebrate, let's have some good fun, and enjoy the last little snippets of The Legacy Of. Until next time, friends, I'm out of here. Peace out.